Welcome. My name is Sarah Blumenfeld, and I'm the Program Director with the Lafayette Library and Learning Center Foundation. The Foundation, in addition to providing library operating funds, sponsors a variety of library programs for all ages, including today's Library Live Online with author Jeff Gottesfeld. Today's program is one of 2 October events that the Foundation also sponsored for the Lafayette School District. Last week, over 700 3rd and 5th graders enjoyed story time with author Nancy Chernin and today's guest author, Jeff Gottesfeld. A video recording of both programs will be available on the Lafayette Library YouTube channel, and I'll send out an email when today's program recording is posted. Today, Jeff will discuss his book, No Steps Behind, Beate Sirota Gordon's Battle for Women's Rights in Japan. If you're interested in reading Jeff's book, the Foundation has donated copies to the Lafayette Library collection. Please contact the Lafayette Library directly to reserve a copy. To purchase the book, perhaps as a holiday gift, please consider shopping local at Bell & Buna's Books. Bell donates a percentage to the Lafayette Library. No Steps Behind is a beautifully illustrated children's book that tells the remarkable story of Beate Sirota Gordon, a woman of courage you may not have heard of, but who made a big impact in the world, a true unsung hero. We will take questions at the end of Jeff's presentation. Please use the Q&A feature to zoom in to type in your questions as we go. Now I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Jeff Gottesfeld. Jeff, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you to everybody for having me. This is a rare opportunity for me. I had the misfortune to have my book's publication date be March the 3rd of 2020. Almost immediately after publication, I had a slew of speaking engagements be canceled for obvious reasons. So to be able to talk to all of you this way is just a blessing to me. I love this story, and I'm grateful to Sarah and the Lafayette Library for having me speak on this. When I think about Beate, well, let me say a couple of words about me before I talk about Beate and her life. I've been writing for a very long time. I think at this point in my career, I've written just about everything under the sun that's not about architecture or morality. I've written some young adult fiction. I've written books for elementary grade kids. I've written some best-selling pop fiction under a pseudonym. I've written for television. I've written for the stage. And now, for about the last 8 or 9 years, I've been focused on children's book manuscripts. I don't illustrate. That's not my thing. What I try to do is look for great stories that reflect values that I think young people ought to have, and research those stories well and tell those stories. My first children's book was a book called The Tree in the Courtyard. It came out from Knopf in 2016. Fortunately, it's done very well. It's been translated into a bunch of languages, including Japanese, and I'm very proud with how that book has turned out. The book about Beate is my second children's book. I have another one coming in March of 2021 called 21 Steps. Steps are clearly a theme for me. This subtitle is Guarding the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And it is about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which is celebrating its 100th anniversary on November 11th of next year. And the remarkable men and women of every ethnicity, religion, race, Native nations who guard this tomb 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and have done so since 1937 through the military. This book, No Steps Behind, I'm often asked how I got the idea for it, and I can point to the precise moment. It was January the 2nd of 2013, and those who know me know I read everything. I was reading the New York Times on that day online and reading the obituaries, and I read this obituary about Beate Sirota Gordon, who had died 2 or 3 days before in New York in her 80s of pancreatic cancer. And I was like, this is the most amazing story I've ever heard. How do I not know this woman? And I kept reading, and the further I read, the more amazing the story got. So let me tell you this story as I tell it to kids in this book, and then I'm going to share some photographs and other information about her life that I hope will give you some insight into this really transformative feminist character of the 20th century. I am fond of saying she is the most important feminist of the 20th century that no one's ever heard of. Illustrations of this book are by Sheila Witanto, who lives right now in Jakarta, Indonesia, and we'll talk a little bit about Sheila when I'm done. Okay. No Steps Behind, Beate Sirota Gordon's battle for women's rights in Japan. And we open with a Japanese proverb, Ono wa sanpo sagate aruku, women walk 3 steps behind. On a gray day in 1929, a young Jewish girl named Beate stood wide-eyed at the rail of an enormous steamship as it eased into Yokohama Harbor. Her father, Leo Sirota, was a famous pianist who had left anti-Semitic Russia for opportunity in Austria. His talent brought the family to Japan. When they arrived, Beate had never before seen an Asian person. The girl had an ear for languages. She learned fluent Japanese and came to love her new home. Sunrise from the crest of Nogi Hill, the beautiful words for thank you, domo arigato. Hanetsuki badminton and kanji drawing with her best friend Akara, the boom of taiko drums, and the rustle of her yukata in the moonlight. She also discovered Japan's unfair side. There was a small movement for women's rights, but men still controlled everything. Fathers could sell daughters to strangers. In the bustling Ginza market, some wives walked 3 steps behind their husbands. At many gatherings, women had no place at the table. Even Akara looked at the floor if a strange man entered the room. Ugly proverbs made Beate bristle. The wisdom of women is at the end of the nose. In women's hearts dwell serpents. Women are devilish. When Beate was 15 and ready for college, few girls were allowed in Japanese universities. Oops, let me back up. As Beate grew older, the world grew hateful. Adolf Hitler led Nazi Germany to war, and the final solution to rid the world of Jews, Japan allied with Germany and invaded China, where its soldiers slaughtered millions. When Beate was 15 and ready for college, few girls were allowed in. Japanese universities were closed to them, and return to Europe was out of the question. Her parents sent her where they thought she could be safe, Mills College in Oakland, California, an American school especially for women. There, they learned to be doctors, scientists, artists, and writers. The very first day, the college president gave a speech about equal rights. Beate had never heard anything like it. The United States stayed out of the fighting until Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Cut off from her parents, with mail and phone lines to Tokyo severed, Beate's heart was torn. She hated Japan's military, but loved its people. She wanted America and its allies to win, but was outraged when Japanese Americans were deported to internment camps. Forced to support herself, frantic for news of her parents, Beate used her language skills to monitor Japanese radio. She heard nothing of them. When Japanese planes rained fire on Tokyo and soot fell like black snow, she could only hope her family was safe. A joyless August morning saw the atomic attack on Hiroshima, but Japan's surrender still brought no word of her parents. With travel there forbidden to civilians, Beate begged the army for a job. Rebuilding a country didn't seem like women's work to them, but when they heard her perfect Japanese, they hired her as a researcher and an interpreter. Aboard a crowded troop plane, Beate got her first glimpse of Japan in years. Her face was as ashen as her adopted country. Once on the ground, Beate searched desperately for her mother and father. The Ginza was flattened. At her family's house, a single charred pillar teetered in the wreckage. But that night, she heard a faint, familiar voice in the hotel lobby. Beate. It was her father. He had learned of her arrival. Thin as piano wire, he explained that her mother was freezing in a remote mountain cabin. Japan had interned all foreigners. Beate and her father rushed there with army-issued chocolate bars. Finally reunited, the family drank glassful after glassful of steaming tea, heated on a tiny stove. With her parents safe, Beate got to work. General MacArthur was in charge of the occupation. When his team discovered how well the young translator knew the country, they assigned her to help write Japan's new constitution, the nation's basic law. Beate was just 22, the only woman in a room of lawyers and officers. And she asked herself, what do I know about constitutions? Determined to learn, she scoured Tokyo for useful books. A few libraries had survived, battered guardians of hope to help people turn from war to peace. The general wanted Japan to have an elected government. Beate knew that even with elections, men would seize power. Japan would remain a place where farmers sold daughters like fish at the market, girls were forced to marry, and women walked 3 steps behind. The only one who could speak for Japan's women was Beate. She drafted a long list of changes to ensure their place at the table of the future and brought her ideas to her commanding officer. He protested. "You've given Japanese women more rights than there are in the American Constitution." Beate responded calmly, "Colonel Cadiz, that's not very hard to do because women are not in the American Constitution." She was so stubborn and persuasive that the colonel finally agreed to her biggest demands, and Beate wrote the words herself. From Article 14, all of the people are equal under the law, and there shall be no discrimination in political, economic, or social relations because of race, creed, sex, social status, or family origin. Home Minister Matsumoto led a delegation to discuss the proposed new law. Again, Beate was the only woman at the table. The Japanese delegations admired her perfect diction and swift translations, and they called her Beate-san and told her domo arigato. But when the Americans proposed Article 14, the delegation was furious. Beate fumed, but reported their words precisely. "This doesn't fit our culture, doesn't fit our history, doesn't fit our way of life." Debate raged for hours. Finally, Colonel Cadiz spoke. "This article was written by Miss Sirota herself. She has her heart set on this issue. Why don't we just pass it?" The delegates stared. Beate-san wrote this? This young woman raised in their country who knew their customs and spoke like a native? The woman they respected so much? Beate fixed her eyes on them, not on the floor. "All right," the men agreed. "We'll do it your way." The story should have made headlines. A young woman had changed a nation's future, but the United States considered it a security secret. Decades later, when she was finally permitted to talk of what she'd done, Beate returned to Tokyo. She discovered she was a hero. There were speeches and concerts in her honor. The government gave her a special award. Her reunion with her childhood friend Akara, now a professor of French, was national news. Women were doctors, scientists, artists, and writers. In the Ginza, no woman walked 3 steps behind. Instead, they rushed to greet her. "Domo arigato, Beate-san, domo arigato." As they embraced, Beate may well have recalled another old proverb. "Ona nara dua yoga keno." Without women, dawn doesn't break. The end. I love that story. I love that story because the significant in life are rarely famous, and the famous are rarely significant. Beate Sirota Gordon was incredibly, incredibly significant. Let me show you some pictures now that will give you a little better insight into the incredible artwork that Sheila did on this book and into Beate's life. Let's see if I can make this work properly. And great. So on the left is the cover. On the right, this is Beate as an older woman when she's back in Japan, speaking on Japanese television. And this is Beate with Japanese young women and students on her return in the early 2000s. Beate's father grew up actually in Ukraine. He was a astonishingly brilliant pianist. You can find his music easily on Spotify and on YouTube. He was in the same class as Artur Rubinstein and Glenn Gould. He was that famous and that significant. But in 1905, those of you who know the history, there were a wave of pogroms that spread across Russian-occupied Eastern Europe through Ukraine, and not only to seek opportunity, but to escape from that anti-Semitism, Leo came to Austria, which was then it was the cultural center of the world. Things were great. He met Augustine Horenstein, the sister of Joschka Horenstein, the famous composer. He played concerts all over Europe, came to America, even played in Japan, and then economic disaster struck Central Europe. Money was devalued to the point where it could be used as fuel and to support his family. That's when Leo and his cohort, his family, went to Japan. Here's some of the things you can't say in a children's book. This is Beate on her arrival in Yokohama Harbor as Sheila saw her, and then a picture of her at age 5 in Japan. Beate wrote a terrific memoir called "The Only Woman in the Room," and she recounts her arrival in Yokohama Harbor, and she recalls her saying to her mother and father, since she had never seen an Asian person before, "Are they all brothers and sisters?" Beate had a true gift for languages. She had a true openness to culture and a true sense of women being as equal as men could be in a society. This is a picture of her with her friend Akara when she was young, and you can see how Sheila depicts the friendship. There are more of the really awful proverbs that were rife in Japan at the time. A bow drawn by a woman won't shoot. Complaint is the way of women. I spoke with Nicole Gordon, who is Beate's daughter, and at this point is a friend of mine and who helped me a great deal with this book. And we had a conversation talking about what Beate might have said to her folks as she got old enough to understand this degree of discrimination against women in Europe. And Nicole reminded me that there was really no place else for the Sirotas to go at that point. People were leaving, Jews were leaving Europe then and not returning. She said she could easily see her grandfather saying to Beate, "Don't talk about this. We're guests here. We have no place else to go." And there was also, at the time, increasing Japanese militarism. Through the 30s, Japan had invaded China, was an occupying force at that point in Taiwan, Korea, and was extending its reach into Indonesia, and then into the Philippines. So when it came time for Beate to go to school, Mills was the closest safe place to go. On the left, you'll see Beate as a college student there, and then on the right, you'll see that remarkable gaze that Sheila captures in watercolor after watercolor of Beate at age 15 and a half, not all that much older than some of the kids to whom I'd read this book, at Mills College. At first, she was sailing along there. She could get money from her parents. Her parents even came to visit her. When Pearl Harbor happened, though, she was stranded and found work across the bay in San Francisco, translating Japanese radio broadcasts for the War Department. She had the hard task of doing that kind of translation when, in March of 1945, the United States Air Force firebombed Tokyo. She did not know if her parents were alive or dead. After the war, on top, Sheila's depiction of what Beate might have looked like going on her troop transport back to Tokyo. On the bottom, what Tokyo looked like. Before we started this webinar, I was talking with Sheila and with Sarah, I'm sorry, and said it was a good thing that Beate knew Tokyo because there were no buildings as landmarks, street signs were gone. When she commandeered that Jeep and drove around trying to find any constitution that she could use to work from, she had to know where to go. This is her War Department ID card. If you're interested in her life, across just up the road from Lafayette at Mills College is Beate's archive, and it is full of incredible material. The archive opened to the public, I think it was 2 years ago, a year and a half ago in May. Her ID card is there. Beate was the right woman at the right time with the right background and the right concerns to speak up for the women of Japan who were not permitted in that room. They weren't there. They were certainly not part of the Japanese delegation, and Japanese women were not taken into account by the American delegation. Were it not for her, there would be no Article 14 or Article 24 in the new Constitution. On the left, Sheila Watanta's depiction of what the negotiation looked like. On the right, the men in the room at a calmer time during those negotiations. And then finally, Beate returned to Japan about 45 years later. On the left is a picture of Beate and her friend Akara. On the right, Sheila's idea of what that might have looked like in the Ginza market. The reason for the security blackout was the United States didn't want the Japanese to think that the US had anything to do with the new Constitution. And the Japanese didn't want their people to think that the US had anything to do with the Constitution. So secrecy was maintained through that time. When Beate went back, she was a hero and remains a hero in that country. There have been books written about her, plays about her, documentaries, movies. She is a seminal figure in Japan even today. So let's see if I can do that. Let me talk about a couple of challenges that I had writing this book, and then I think we can open this up for some questions after that. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is that this is a fairly complicated story for young people, and to try to find a way to tell it in 1,100 words or less, that was a challenge. I went through multiple drafts with this text, always looking for ways to simplify it, but not make it too simple. I hope I threaded the needle on it. The second great challenge, of course, is look at me. I am not Japanese. I'm not a Japanese speaker. So I had to go at my own writing from the stance that I was screwing it up at every turn. I had this book vetted, revetted, revetted. Thank God for the Department of Asian Languages and Japanese at my alma mater, Colby College, which was incredibly helpful to me in my vetting. I had it read by Japanese Americans, by Japanese people, by Americans who were in Japan. And I made some mistakes in early drafts, things that I would not have caught, but for my sensitivity readers, I'm very glad I went through that process. This was not something that I wanted to screw up. And I think that I got it right. Finally, for the values that this story pushes forward, Beate succeeded for a number of them. One is, this is a woman incredibly open to new experience. She could have recoiled at the idea of a move from Austria to Japan. Instead, she opened her heart and embraced Japan. She was good at languages too. She knew Japanese, English, Russian, German, French, and learned Spanish after she came to the US. She was determined. It would have been easy for her to crack at any time and let the men run roughshod over her. She did not. She stuck to her guns, and that's how those clauses came in. Thirdly, she was diplomatic and could control herself in the room with the Americans and the Japanese when they are essentially arguing about women who are not in the room. She managed her emotions and got what she wanted. I'm very proud of this book. I'm very proud that this story is out there. I hope that it will inspire young people to want to be significant and not necessarily famous. Okay, I'll take all kinds of questions.
Hi, Jeff, it's Sarah. So
Great.
I'm going to read
And if you don't have any, I'll make some up.
No, it's okay. I'm going to read questions to you. And the first is a two-part question. You talk about her father, and I'm curious to know maybe what influence her mother had on her, and who her mother was. And then the second part to that, and whether or not, how that might have inspired her and motivated her. And the second part touches on a line in your book about the college president and the speech that he gave about equal rights. I'm wondering how her mother and that speech
she gave the college president
gave, and how those two forces might have influenced her.
All right, let me see if I can take these one by one. Her mom was a bold woman. Here's how bold she was. Augustine Harnstein, when she met Leo Sirota, was married in Vienna and had a child, and Jewish wedding, Jewish kid, fell in love with Leo and divorced her husband at a time when that was not common at all, and threw in her lot with Leo Sirota. From what Nicole has told me about her mom was not as good a musician as Leo was, but musically very adept, also taught, and gave, I think, Beate the wherewithal and support to be open to what Japanese culture was like. The reference to the speech by the college president, and I forget her name, I apologize to Mills, I knew it at one point. Beate talked about it in one of the many oral histories that she recorded. She did oral history for Columbia, She did one for a British institute. I feel like maybe for the University of Virginia at all. I read all these transcripts and have it somewhere. And incredibly inspirational to come out of Japan to a place like Mills, where women are told, you can do it, and you should do it. And she did do it.
So this question is from Madeline, and she has kind of also a two-part question. She is a fellow Colby grad.
Yay!
She's
Great.
writing a piece for a Jewish parenting website, and she would love to know a little bit more about Beate's Jewish identity. Do you know anything about her Jewish background? And then there's a second part to that, wondering if that, sort of impacted her civic work.
I do. So look, it's a great question. The Sirota family was not observant, but not observant at a time when being non-observant meant people had much more background. For example, I think you can dig around and find this on the web. There's a collection of photographs of Beate through her life at the website of someone, I believe his name is Shine Watanabe. You can find it. There's a letter on there, and in the header to the letter that Beate sends back to Japan to her folks, the date is Rosh Hashanah. So the family was not observant. There were not many Jews in Japan at the time, but clearly committed to Jewish principles of repairing the world and opening one's heart to strangers. So to show you how non-religious they were, this is like one of those textual corrections that came from having the manuscript read. In the section where I talk about how Beate could only hope that her parents were alive during the firebombing of Tokyo, I sent that to Nicole Gordon, and Nicole contacted me and said, no, my mom would not pray. So the word prayer was substituted with the word hope.
Interesting. The other question that Madeline has is for you specifically about your Jewish identity and how that might impact the stories you're drawn to, and does it?
So it's a long conversation. I invite Madeline to call me. I'm observant, but not Orthodox. Judaism is a faith where values are crucial. In Beate's story, the idea again of being welcomed by the stranger and reaching out to everyone, to widows and orphans and women, was a crucial theme for me. Beate was largely welcomed when she went to Tokyo, and not just by Japanese. There was a big expatriate community on Nogi Hill. She made friends with people from all over the world. Unfortunately, she attended the German school in Tokyo to begin with. Anti-Semitism there got so bad that for her last year of high school, her family switched her over to the American school.
Jeff, I just want to point out something about your book that we might not have seen when you were reading it, and that is at the back of the book, the beautiful references and the additional information you have about Beate with pictures, a timeline of her life. This is one of the wonderful things about the publisher that Jeff is with, Creston Books. All of the books that are published with Creston Books have a teacher's guide and this kind of detailed research included in the book, which is, I don't know, as someone who loves history, I always appreciate that and enjoy that.
Every single word of this book is sourced. I pretty much go through it sentence by sentence. Well, that's an exaggeration, but carefully in the afterword. The dialogue is verbatim. Nothing is quoted as dialogue unless there's a source for it, whether it's the New York Times, Beate's memoirs, other people writing about Beate who were there. It is verbatim. This is probably a good moment to talk about Sheila Witanto, who's the unbelievable illustrator for this book. Marissa Moss, my publisher and editor at Creston, met Sheila when Sheila was an art student in San Francisco. She had a visa to stay here. The visa was on the heading toward expiration. Sheila, I believe, applied for a green card, and the current administration would not grant her that card and gave her 2 weeks to return to Indonesia. That's where she is now. It grieves me that she is not another face on this screen. If we were later in the day, maybe so. She's done at least one of these with kids with me coming in, but she should be right here because her artwork is incredible.
I have to agree. The illustrations are gorgeous, and it tells a lot of the story just with the drawings and the artwork that she adds to it.
And hard to do because, you know, she's working with historical material. So, you know, she had to find photographs of people and then figure out a way to make it work for kids. I'm so taken every time I look through this text of Beate's gaze in spread after spread after spread. It is penetrating and knowing and wise.
All right, well, Jeff, I wanted, can you put up that last title slide that we had? And
That I can.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and for joining us today. And I really want to thank Jeff Gottesfeld for not only doing today's program, but last week's program with the library. And I just want to remind everyone that the books are available at the library and at Bell and Buna's, and we will have this recording up on our YouTube channel probably by sometime next week, and I'll send everyone an email to let you know when, so you can share it with anyone who might have missed today. I had never heard this story, Jeff. I just love telling other people about her because it's such an incredible story and inspiring, and I want to thank you so much for bringing this story to light so we can share it with.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you to everyone for being here. It means a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.